The haunting of Blackwood Manor in the wilderness. Nestled deep within the heart of an untamed jungle, hidden from the eyes of most travelers, stood Blackwood Manor, an imposing structure of dark stone and twisted vines. Its windows were like hollow eyes, staring blankly into the dense forest surrounding it. The once grand estate, now long abandoned, had a sinister reputation among the locals who lived on the outskirts of the wilderness. They spoke in hushed tones of the strange occurrences, the eerie whispers carried on the wind, and the strange, spectral figures that seemed to drift through the thick trees at night. The manor had been home to the Blackwood family for generations. Wealthy and influential, they were known for their ambitious expeditions into the jungle, searching for rare plants and ancient artifacts. But it was a trip on one fateful evening that sealed their family's grim fate. On that night, when the moon was hidden behind clouds, a mysterious fire ravaged the manor, leaving nothing but charred ruins. The Blackwood family, including its young heir, had never been seen again. Some claimed they had perished in the flames, while others whispered darker theories of rituals gone wrong, of vengeance from the jungle itself. Years passed, and the jungle slowly reclaimed the land. The manor was abandoned, its walls overtaken by creeping ivy, and its halls left to decay in silence. But it wasn't empty. In the village nearby, a curious young historian named Evelyn had always been fascinated by the manor's dark history. Determined to uncover the truth, she set off into the wilderness one warm spring morning, armed with little more than a journal and her determination. The journey was grueling, the air thick with humidity, but Evelyn was undeterred. The deeper she ventured into the jungle, the stronger the feeling that she wasn't alone became. By the time she reached the manor, the sun was setting, casting a blood-red hue across the sky. The manor loomed before her like a living thing, its decaying walls seeming to sigh under the weight of years gone by. The air around it felt thick, almost oppressive, as though the jungle itself was holding its breath. Evelyn stepped cautiously through the rusted gates, the crunch of dry leaves beneath her feet the only sound in the stillness. She pushed open the heavy, creaking doors and entered the manor. The air inside was stale, and dust hung in the air like a shroud. Her footsteps echoed through the vast, empty halls, the grandiose architecture now shattered by time and neglect. As she explored deeper into the manor, she felt a strange pull, an unsettling sensation that she was being watched. She brushed it off as nerves, attributing it to the eerie atmosphere. But then, as she reached the grand staircase, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing her lantern. In the dark, she heard something, faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakably there, a soft whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. Evelyn. Her heart raced, but she was too curious to leave. She fumbled in the darkness, trying to relight her lantern, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. Leave this place, or join us. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Evelyn felt a presence behind her. Spinning around, she saw nothing, but the feeling of being surrounded by unseen eyes was overwhelming. The walls of the manor seemed to close in around her as the whispers grew into frantic cries. In the dim light of her flickering lantern, shapes began to form, shadows twisting into the faint outlines of figures. They were ghostly, translucent, their faces twisted in anguish. Evelyn stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. The figures moved closer, their whispers turning into guttural murmurs. She could hear fragments of their words, cries for help, curses, warnings, pleading for release from whatever bound them to the manor. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to groan in protest. As the shadows swirled around her, Evelyn's mind raced. She knew the stories, she knew the Blackwoods had been obsessed with ancient rituals, seeking immortality, tapping into dark forces to ensure their legacy lived on. But had their thirst for power truly condemned them to this fate? Was it possible that their spirits still lingered, bound to the very walls of the manor, trapped in a never-ending cycle of torment? Desperate to escape, Evelyn bolted toward the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. She turned, heart pounding, as the shadows began to close in on her. Her lantern flickered once more before going out entirely, plunging the room into pitch darkness. A voice, cold and hollow, echoed in her mind. You are one of us now. The darkness swallowed her. When the villagers found her days later, there was no trace of Evelyn except for her journal, left behind at the manor's threshold. The pages were filled with frantic scrawlings, describing her descent into madness as the shadows took hold of her, her soul now bound to the cursed manor. And so, Blackwood Manor in the wilderness remained, its haunting presence still alive in the jungle, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close, ready to claim another victim. The whispers of the Blackwood family, now lost to time, echoed through the trees, a warning to anyone who dared enter its dark embrace. The haunting of Blackwood Manor in the wilderness continued. Years passed, and Blackwood Manor faded into legend. The village on the outskirts of the jungle continued to grow, but no one dared venture near the ruins of the once majestic estate. The jungle itself seemed to guard the place, thick vines and towering trees growing ever more dense around the manor. Nature had reclaimed it, but something darker still lingered in the shadows. One day, a group of explorers arrived at the village, seeking to uncover the secrets of Blackwood Manor. They were led by Thomas Drake, a renowned adventurer known for his expeditions into the deepest, most perilous corners of the earth. He had heard the tale of Evelyn's disappearance and was determined to be the one to solve the mystery of the manor. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment and a team of highly trained guides, Thomas set off into the wilderness, confident that the jungle's eerie reputation would not deter him. He believed there was a logical explanation for the strange happenings, perhaps gas, perhaps some natural phenomenon. He was not prepared for what he would find. The journey was grueling, far more so than anyone had anticipated. The jungle seemed to fight against them with every step. Thorn-covered branches scraped at their skin, and the air grew so thick with humidity that their clothes clung to them like wet rags. But they pushed forward, following a faint trail left by previous adventurers, unaware of the danger that awaited them. When they finally reached the manor, dusk was falling. The air around them had grown heavy, almost oppressive, and a thick mist began to roll in from the surrounding forest. Swirling around their feet, the towering structure loomed before them, more menacing than they had imagined. The manor seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it were alive, watching them. Thomas and his team entered the manor cautiously. The door creaked on its hinges, and they stepped into the grand foyer, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Their lights flickered in the oppressive darkness, casting long, stretching shadows on the decaying walls. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to make the first move. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The manor was cold, and dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of immediate danger. The team split up to explore the different rooms, their voices muffled by the thick air. But soon, something started to feel wrong. As they ventured deeper into the manor, they began to notice strange symbols carved into the walls, covered in a layer of grime. In one room, they found a strange altar, covered with dried remnants of herbs and what looked like old, cracked stones. The floor beneath them creaked in protest as they moved, and their equipment started malfunctioning. GPS signals were lost. Radios crackled with distorted, unintelligible voices. The sense of isolation grew stronger with each passing minute. Suddenly, one of the guides screamed. Thomas and the others rushed to the sound, finding the guide standing in the center of a large room, staring in horror at something no one else could see. "There's something behind me," the guide whispered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could react, the guide was yanked backward by an invisible force, his body slamming into the wall with bone-crushing force. He crumpled to the floor, his eyes wide with terror. His body was unmarked, but his face was frozen in an expression of sheer, unrelenting fear. Panic spread through the team. They tried to move quickly, but the house seemed to shift around them. The walls seemed to close in, the windows now blackened, as if the outside world had disappeared altogether. Whispers began to fill the air, low and insistent, growing louder with each passing second. "Leave, before it's too late." The voices were unmistakably human, those of the Blackwood family, echoing through the manor. They were trapped, just as Evelyn had been, and their spirits were desperate to protect the manor's secrets. But the whispers were no longer just voices. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to move, stretching toward the team like dark tendrils. Figures, faint outlines of people long dead, began to materialize, their faces contorted in anguish. They reached out, their ghostly hands brushing against the explorers, pulling them deeper into the manor's grasp. Thomas, shaking with fear but driven by the need to uncover the truth, attempted to break through the madness. He made his way toward the central chamber, where he hoped to find answers. But as he crossed the threshold, the air grew freezing cold, and an overwhelming presence filled the room. The shadowy figures materialized more vividly now, their hollow eyes fixed on him. "You seek the truth," a voice boomed, deep and resonant, as if it came from the very walls themselves. "But some truths are meant to remain buried." Thomas's heart raced, and his thoughts swirled in a fog. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, its surface cracked but still reflecting faint images of the past. As he gazed into it, he saw the Blackwood family standing around an altar, their eyes hollow and their faces twisted with unnatural smiles. They chanted in a language he could not understand, performing a ritual that seemed to pull the life force from the very earth beneath them. In a flash of realization, Thomas understood. The Blackwood family had used the jungle's dark powers to extend their lives. But in doing so, they had become bound to the manor, their spirits unable to escape. They had made a pact with the jungle, and now, that same force was claiming everyone who dared to enter. "Leave now, or you will join us," the voice echoed. Thomas backed away, but the room seemed to close in on him. The floor beneath him shifted, and he found himself falling into a dark abyss. His screams were lost in the eternal night as the manor consumed him, just as it had consumed Evelyn and the Blackwood family before her. The next day, the villagers found the remains of Thomas's team scattered around the jungle, their faces twisted in terror. The manor stood silent once more, its dark secrets hidden behind the thick veil of jungle and time. Those who lived nearby still tell the stories of the manor, of the explorers who sought the truth and never returned. And they continue to warn anyone who would listen. Never enter Blackwood Manor. It is not a place for the living. The haunting of Blackwood Manor in the wilderness continued. The whispers of Blackwood Manor persisted through the years, carried by the wind and wrapped in the stories told around campfires. It became a place of cautionary tales, a reminder to the villagers of the unseen dangers lurking within the jungle's depths. But time has a way of dulling fear, and the manor's dark reputation slowly faded into legend. Then, a decade later, an unusual expedition was mounted. This time, it wasn't driven by the thirst for adventure or the search for forgotten history. It was driven by the promise of wealth. The story began when a wealthy entrepreneur named Henry Grayson, known for his interest in rare artifacts, came across old records of the Blackwood family while visiting a museum in the city. Among them, he found references to ancient, priceless relics said to be hidden within the manor itself, artifacts of immeasurable value, believed to be lost to time. Grayson was not one to be deterred by the folklore that surrounded the manor. To him, the legends were just that, stories. He saw only a fortune waiting to be uncovered. Grayson assembled a team of experts, archaeologists, anthropologists, and even a local guide who claimed to have ventured close to the manor in his youth. With the lure of gold, they set off into the jungle, their path marked by the thick foliage and the heavy, oppressive air that had claimed so many before them. Despite warnings from the villagers, they pressed on, convinced that Blackwood Manor held nothing more than secrets of a bygone family, buried beneath layers of dust and decay. As they neared the ruins, the jungle seemed to become denser, the path narrower, almost as if the land itself was pushing them away. But Grayson, driven by greed, refused to turn back. The team arrived at the manor at dusk, just as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a dim orange glow over the crumbling structure. The place appeared even more unsettling than they had imagined, shrouded in mist, with the jagged ruins of its once grand architecture looming over them like the gaping maw of a great beast. "Stay close, and stay sharp," Grayson commanded, his voice brimming with excitement. "This place will be a gold mine." They ventured inside, their footsteps careful on the unstable floors, the air thick with the musty scent of decay. The manor was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creaking of the old beams above them. They had brought flashlights and equipment to document their findings, eager to catalog anything of value. But soon, their enthusiasm began to wane. There was something unsettling in the atmosphere, a tension in the air, a presence that seemed to watch them from every corner. At first, the team thought it was just the isolation playing tricks on them. But then, they started hearing it. A low, guttural hum, like the sound of distant chanting, came from deep within the house. It was faint at first, but it grew steadily louder, reverberating through the walls, as though it were coming from somewhere below the floorboards. "What is that?" one of the archaeologists whispered, his voice trembling. It sounds like voices. Grayson, though visibly uneasy, dismissed it. It's probably just the wind, this place is old, full of creaks and groans. Focus on the artifacts. We're here for treasure, not ghost stories. They continued to search the manor, but the whispers refused to fade. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the hairs on the back of their necks stood up. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, stretching toward them as if alive. In the center of the grand hall, they found what they were searching for, a large stone pedestal, its surface covered in moss and ivy. Atop it lay an ornate chest, intricately carved with symbols none of them recognized. Grayson's eyes gleamed as he approached it. "This is it," he said, his voice almost reverent, "the treasure of Blackwood Manor." But as his hands touched the chest, a deafening crash echoed through the manor. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, sending the team stumbling. The walls groaned as though they were alive, and the temperature plummeted, freezing them to the bone. "Get it open," Grayson ordered, though his confidence had begun to waver. The box, whatever it contained, was more important to him than anything else now. But as they attempted to open the chest, something horrifying happened. A dark mist began to pour from the chest, swirling around them like smoke. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the whispers reached a fever pitch, filling their minds with desperate voices. "Leave now, or join us." The shadows in the corners of the room began to stir, taking shape, manifesting into dark figures, forms of people twisted in agony. The faces were hollow, their eyes wide with terror and pain. Grayson's heart raced as he backed away from the chest, but it was too late. The figures advanced, their eyes locked on him, their outstretched hands reaching for him. "No, get away from me," Grayson screamed, but his voice was drowned by the cacophony of the whispers. In an instant, the figures were upon him, their cold hands grasping at his limbs, pulling him toward the chest. His scream was cut short as the mist engulfed him, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone, swallowed by the very darkness that had consumed the Blackwood family. The remaining members of the team tried to flee, but the manor would not let them go. The doors slammed shut with a deafening bang, windows shattered, but beyond the shards of glass, there was nothing, just an impenetrable wall of shadow and mist. They were trapped, just as Evelyn had been, just as Thomas and his team had been before them. One by one, the members of Grayson's team were taken by the shadows, their screams echoing through the empty halls. The house seemed to feed on their terror, growing stronger with each passing moment. The spirits of the Blackwood family, trapped in their eternal torment, had claimed new victims. The last of the team, the guide who had once tried to warn them, was the final one left. He rushed toward the door, his legs trembling, but as his hand touched the handle, a low voice whispered in his ear, "You can't leave, you're one of us now." The guide's body went rigid, his eyes empty of life as he turned to face the shadows. He, too, disappeared into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but the silence of the jungle. And so, Blackwood Manor stood, its secrets once again safe, its hunger unsatisfied. The jungle whispered of its presence, and the winds carried the voices of the lost, those who sought wealth, who sought knowledge, but found only death. To this day, no one dares to venture into the depths of the wilderness, for Blackwood Manor is not just a place, it is a living thing, a trap for the unwary, and as long as it stands, the spirits of the Blackwood family, along with the lost souls who sought to uncover their secrets, will never rest. The manor waits, forever hungry. The haunting of Blackwood Manor in the wilderness continued. Years passed since the tragic end of Henry Grayson and his team, and still, Blackwood Manor stood, its looming silhouette casting a long shadow over the jungle. The stories surrounding the manor grew even darker, the whispers more insistent. It had become a legend, feared by the villagers, yet tantalizing to those who still sought riches, answers, or fame. But what if there were some who, unlike Grayson, were not driven by greed, but by something else, a thirst for knowledge, perhaps, or an obsession with a past that refused to die? The rumors of Blackwood Manor didn't only attract the unwary and the foolish. It also caught the attention of someone much more dangerous, someone who had the means, the resources, and the unwavering determination to uncover its mysteries. Dr. Veronica Lancaster was a renowned occultist and historian. Her studies had taken her across the globe, uncovering ancient texts, deciphering forgotten languages, and researching long-lost rituals. But what truly captivated her was the supernatural, the boundaries between the living and the dead. When she first heard of Blackwood Manor's haunted history, something inside her stirred, a gnawing curiosity that soon turned into an obsession. Dr. Lancaster had researched the Blackwood family's origins for years. She had come across records detailing their connection to the occult, their deep involvement in ancient rituals, and their failed attempts to manipulate the very fabric of life and death. Her fascination grew with each discovery, leading her to one conclusion: Blackwood Manor was not just haunted by the spirits of the family, it was a gateway, a point of convergence between the living world and something far darker. But to prove this, she needed to enter the manor itself. Her journey into the jungle began with the same cold resolve that had marked her entire career. She paid little attention to the warnings of the villagers, brushing aside their fearful glances and hushed whispers. She came prepared, bringing not only her vast knowledge of ancient rituals but also equipment capable of capturing spectral phenomena. She was determined to uncover the truth about the manor's haunting, to understand what had happened to the Blackwood family, and, perhaps, to unlock a deeper, more powerful force that had been dormant for centuries. Veronica entered the jungle with a small, trusted team, specialists in paranormal activity, a few experienced guides, and a photographer who had documented similar sites. The journey to the manor was long, but it felt different this time. The jungle seemed to push back with greater ferocity, as if it had become more protective of its dark secret. They fought their way through the thick underbrush, the air heavy with the scent of decay and damp earth, until at last, the decaying walls of Blackwood Manor loomed before them. The manor looked as though it had been untouched for years, but there was something unsettling about its stillness, almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for them to arrive. Veronica stepped forward with confidence, her boots crunching against the dry leaves as her team followed her. Once inside, the oppressive atmosphere of the manor seemed to settle over them like a heavy cloak. The doors slammed behind them with a deafening bang, locking them in. It was as if the manor had acknowledged their presence, welcoming them into its eternal grip. The temperature dropped suddenly, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled the air. Veronica's team set up their equipment as instructed, their flashlights casting eerie shadows across the decaying walls. But it was Veronica who could feel it most acutely, a presence in the air, thick and suffocating. It was as if the manor itself was watching them, its eyes unseen but all-knowing. "I feel it," the photographer, Lydia, whispered nervously. It's breathing, like the house itself is alive." Veronica nodded solemnly, her mind racing with possibilities. The Blackwoods had once attempted to harness powers beyond comprehension. What if those attempts had left behind a lasting imprint? What if their obsession with immortality had torn a hole between the world of the living and the dead? The whispers started soon after, faint at first but growing louder with each passing moment. Veronica's team tried to ignore them, focusing on their work, but the voices crept into their minds, turning their thoughts dark and restless. Leave this place." The temperature plummeted again, the chill in the air now biting at their skin. Lydia, the photographer, turned pale, her breath visible in the air. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Veronica turned to her, but before she could respond, the floor beneath them groaned, and the walls seemed to shake. Something was moving inside the manor, something not of this world. And then, the first shadow appeared. It was only a flicker at first, just a small movement in the corner of Veronica's eye. But when she turned to face it, the shadow expanded, growing larger, taking form. A figure, tall, thin, its outline indistinct but unmistakably humanoid, stepped out of the darkness. Its face was blurred, an empty void of features. The shape moved toward them with unnatural speed. Veronica stepped back, her heart pounding. She recognized it, the manifestation of the Blackwood family's restless spirits, drawn from the very ritual that had bound them to the house. They were no longer mere ghosts, they were something worse, something twisted, fueled by centuries of torment. "It's them," Veronica murmured under her breath, her eyes wide. "The Blackwoods, they never left. They're feeding off the living." The figure reached out with long, clawed hands, and before anyone could react, it lunged at one of the guides, its fingers sinking into his chest with sickening ease. He screamed, but his voice was silenced as his body crumpled to the floor, lifeless, the light in his eyes extinguished. "Get out! Get out!" Veronica screamed, but it was already too late. More figures appeared from the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on the remaining members of the team. One by one, they were picked off, their screams echoing through the manor. The air was thick with despair, and the house seemed to pulse with hunger, pulling them into the very walls. Veronica fought to keep her composure, to maintain control of the situation, but it was clear now, Blackwood Manor was a prison, a gate that would not allow them to leave. She had awakened something far darker than she had ever imagined. In a final act of desperation, Veronica turned to her team's equipment. She gathered her strength, pulling together the knowledge of rituals that had been passed down through centuries. She had to close the gate, to stop the spirits from claiming her as they had done to so many before her. With trembling hands, she began the incantation, using the ancient symbols from the manor's walls as a guide. The shadows writhed, the air thick with the force of the manor's wrath. The spirits howled, their voices deafening as they fought against her, pulling her into the depths of the manor. But Veronica's will was stronger. With one final word, she sealed the gate. The spirits trapped within the walls once more. The house fell silent, the oppressive presence lifting. As the last remnants of her team lay scattered across the floor, Veronica, battered and broken, fell to her knees. She had succeeded in closing the gate, but at what cost? Blackwood Manor remained, waiting, ever hungry for the next soul brave, or foolish enough to step through its doors. And as Veronica's consciousness began to fade, she realized one chilling truth. The spirits of the Blackwood family had never been defeated. They were only biding their time, and they would wait for someone else to come, and when they did, they would once again feast. Blackwood Manor would never be at peace. The haunting of Blackwood Manor in the wilderness continued. Years after Dr. Veronica Lancaster's failed attempt to seal the dark forces within Blackwood Manor, the jungle had slowly begun to reclaim its hold on the crumbling ruins. However, the manor's chilling reputation spread far and wide, even beyond the villagers' warnings. No one could forget the tragic fate of the explorers, the adventurers, and the cursed Blackwood family. Yet, as with all things, time dulls the edge of fear, and the stories faded into myth, like fog swallowed by the morning sun. But the manor had not been forgotten by everyone. A new chapter in the manor's story began with the arrival of a young and ambitious archaeologist named Samuel Klein. Samuel had heard of Blackwood Manor's haunted past through the journals of Dr. Lancaster and the scattered rumors still circulating through the academic world. He was driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge. But more than that, he had a personal stake in the matter. He believed that the key to understanding the manor's supernatural history might hold the answer to a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred throughout the years in the nearby jungle, disappearances that hadn't been tied to the manor but seemed suspiciously close to it. Samuel's research had uncovered an unsettling theory. The manor was not merely haunted by the restless spirits of the Blackwood family but also held a much darker force, a sentient entity born of centuries of occult rituals, human suffering, and twisted pacts. The entity had grown stronger with every passing year, its influence seeping out into the surrounding wilderness. But Samuel wasn't afraid. In fact, he was more excited than ever. He believed that by studying the very heart of the manor's mystery, he could not only solve the riddle of the Blackwood family's curse but also tap into powers that had been hidden for generations. Samuel gathered a small team of like-minded individuals, 2 trusted assistants, both seasoned in occult history, and a local guide who had survived the jungle's many dangers. The group ventured deep into the wilderness, each step taking them closer to Blackwood Manor, and closer to the horrors that lay within. When they arrived, the manor appeared just as it had in the past, silent, decaying, and yet undeniably present. It was as if the house had been waiting, biding its time for someone to challenge it once again. The air was thick with humidity and the stench of rot. The trees around the manor bent like twisted sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching toward the building, as if they were drawn to the ancient, malevolent energy that pulsed from within. "This is it," Samuel said, eyes gleaming with determination as he stared at the foreboding structure. "This is where it all begins." The team entered cautiously, stepping over the threshold and into the cold, silent darkness of the manor. The decay was overwhelming. as if the house itself had been abandoned for centuries. Yet, there was a strange, almost imperceptible hum in the air, like an electrical charge building steadily. Samuel immediately set up his equipment, a series of sensors, recording devices, and cameras, all carefully calibrated to detect any anomalies. The occultists in his team began deciphering the strange symbols on the walls, while the guide, Thomas, nervously glanced over his shoulder every few seconds, as though expecting something to pounce from the shadows. For the first few hours, nothing unusual happened. They explored the grand hall, the broken stairs, and the now ruined library. Dust covered every surface, and the air felt thick with the weight of forgotten history. Yet, the hum grew louder, more palpable, as though the house itself was alive and aware of their presence. As night fell, they found themselves in the heart of the manor, standing in front of the very same mirror that Dr. Lancaster had once seen, a mirror that had reflected the twisted rituals of the Blackwood family. The strange patterns in the glass had grown stronger, clearer. The team gathered around it, and Samuel felt a surge of energy pulsing from the mirror, its surface rippling like water. One of the assistants, Clara, stepped forward, her voice trembling. This is the key. This is where it all started. Her words were barely a whisper, but it was enough to set off a chain of events that none of them could have predicted. The house seemed to shudder, the walls groaning as if waking from a long, dormant sleep. The temperature in the room dropped, and a chill crawled over Samuel's skin, biting into his bones. The once faint hum became a growl, deep and menacing. Then, the mirror began to glow, its surface shimmering with an eerie light. Samuel's heart raced, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He extended a hand toward the mirror, drawn by an irresistible pull. The air around them crackled as the light from the mirror intensified, and suddenly, the reflection shifted. Instead of their own faces, they saw the image of the Blackwood family, frozen in time, performing an ancient ritual. In the vision, the family members were chanting, their voices melding together in a dark symphony. They were standing around the very altar where Evelyn Blackwood had once vanished, a place shrouded in blood, occult symbols, and forgotten gods. The ground seemed to pulse beneath them, alive with dark power. Then, the vision changed again. The figures of the Blackwood family began to distort, their faces contorting in agonizing screams. The energy in the room grew unbearable, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. "Get away from the mirror," Thomas shouted, but it was too late. The figure of a woman, pale and hollow-eyed, appeared in the glass. Evelyn Blackwood, her gaze fixed directly on Samuel. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The temperature plummeted further, and the shadows in the room stretched unnaturally, wrapping around the team like tendrils, pulling them toward the mirror. Samuel stumbled backward, trying to break free of the cold, suffocating grip of the shadows. The others followed, but one by one, they were consumed. The assistant Clara screamed as her body was yanked toward the mirror, her face contorted in terror as her form was absorbed into the glass, her scream echoing through the manor. "Samuel, you have to leave now," Thomas yelled, but the shadows were closing in. In a desperate bid, Samuel grabbed his equipment, pulling it from the ground as the energy in the room reached a fever pitch. He could see the manor itself, its walls, its floor, its very foundation, beginning to twist and ripple, as if it were not a building at all, but a living, breathing entity. With one last glance at the horrors unfolding around him, Samuel turned and fled. The manor seemed to close off every escape, the doors slamming shut as the shadows chased him. His heart pounded in his chest as he raced toward the entrance. The sound of footsteps, no, things, rushing after him. He burst through the door, and for the first time since entering Blackwood Manor, he saw the jungle before him, bathed in the faint light of dawn. But as he reached the edge of the ruins, he realized something terrible. The jungle was alive. The trees, the very ground beneath him, seemed to writhe and shift, as if the manor's malevolent presence had spread beyond its walls. And then, the voices began. Low, guttural whispers filled his ears as he collapsed to his knees, breathless, haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. "Join us," the voices echoed, "forever." But Samuel was not alone. Blackwood Manor had awoken once again. And it was not finished. The manor waits, its hunger never satisfied, its call growing stronger with every passing year. The haunting of Blackwood Manor in the wilderness continued. The sun rose over the jungle, casting an eerie light across the decaying walls of Blackwood Manor. Samuel Klein had escaped, but he was forever marked by what he had witnessed. His body was shaken, and his mind fractured by the horrors he'd seen in the manor. What he hadn't realized in his desperate flight from the manor was that the terror he had fled from wasn't confined to its walls, it had already seeped into the world beyond. He had escaped physically, but the manor's curse was not so easily outrun. As Samuel wandered the wilderness near the manor, he began to feel it, an overwhelming sense of being followed, watched by unseen eyes. His every step felt heavy, like something or someone was lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was as though the jungle itself had become a part of the house's malevolent spirit, and no matter where he went, he could still hear the whispers, soft and haunting, tugging at the edges of his sanity. Days passed, but Samuel couldn't outrun the curse. His dreams were filled with visions of the Blackwood family, their faces twisted in agony, reaching out to him, beckoning him back to the manor. They weren't just shadows in his sleep, they were real, vivid, and insistent. It became clear to him, Blackwood Manor was not done with him. It had left its mark, and he was fated to return. Back at the manor, the spirits stirred once again. The energy Samuel had inadvertently unleashed while attempting to study the mirror was far greater than he had understood. The entity that had resided there for centuries, born of the Blackwood family's dark pacts, had been feeding off the souls that had perished in that forsaken place. And now, it was awakening once more, hungrier than ever. The manor's power had spread, causing strange disturbances in the nearby village. Livestock went missing in the night, crops withered without explanation, and the villagers, once fearful but resigned to the manor's cursed presence, began to speak of things they could not explain. Figures appearing at the edge of their fields, shadows flickering in the corners of their vision, whispers in the wind, all signs that the influence of Blackwood Manor was growing stronger, even reaching beyond its walls. And then, one evening, as the sun set behind the trees, the worst came to pass. A small group of villagers, led by an old man named Elias, gathered at the edge of the jungle. They were tired of the whispers, the terror that had plagued their town for generations. They had heard the stories of Dr. Lancaster, Samuel Klein, and the Blackwood family's dark rituals, but they had never truly believed the manor could reach them. That was until now. Elias, the last of his family line, had lost too many relatives to the manor's curse. It was said that his ancestors had once worked for the Blackwoods, and some whispered they had been complicit in the dark rituals that had bound the spirits to the land. His resolve to destroy the manor had only grown stronger with the years. He knew the time had come to end it. With torches in hand, Elias and his group of villagers ventured into the jungle, determined to face the manor's evil once and for all. Their mission was clear: find the heart of the manor's power and destroy it, no matter the cost. As they neared Blackwood Manor, they felt the change in the air. The jungle grew unnaturally silent, the animals gone, and the breeze that had once been so constant now stilled, leaving only a heavy, suffocating silence in its place. When they reached the manor, its silhouette loomed even darker against the twilight sky, as if the house were waiting, watching, anticipating their arrival. The doors of Blackwood Manor creaked open on their own accord, and the villagers entered with a sense of foreboding. As they stepped inside, they were met with the familiar chill, the musty scent of decay, and the deep sense of being watched. The torches flickered and sputtered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Elias led the group through the crumbling halls, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The house seemed to breathe around them, its walls groaning in protest as if the manor itself were alive, resisting their intrusion. They made their way to the heart of the manor, the large hall where the mirror had once stood. The air grew thicker, and a dark presence seemed to fill the room. The whispers began again, low and insistent, swirling in the air around them. Leave this place." Elias halted, his hand gripping the hilt of his knife. "We're close," he whispered, his voice thick with fear and resolve. "We must destroy it." They found what they were looking for, an altar, ancient and warped. At the center of the room, symbols were carved into the stone, stained with the dark remnants of forgotten rituals. In the center of the altar was a dark, crystalline shard, pulsing with an unnatural light. "This is it," Elias said. "This is the heart of the manor's power." Before they could act, a figure appeared in the doorway, blocking their escape. It was Samuel Klein, his eyes wide and hollow, his skin pale and drawn, as though he had not slept or eaten in days. "No," Samuel said, his voice hoarse. "Don't touch it. You don't understand this place. This thing. It's not just evil. It's ancient. It feeds on our souls, and if you destroy it, you'll only make it stronger. We're all already doomed." Elias turned to face him, his expression grim. "It must be destroyed, Samuel. We can't let it continue." Samuel stepped forward, shaking his head. "You're wrong. It won't die. It's a part of this land, a part of us now. If you destroy it, you'll release it. All of us will be trapped here forever." But it was too late. The altar's energy surged as the villagers, led by Elias, began chanting the ancient words that had been passed down through generations to break the curse. The ground trembled, and the manor itself seemed to howl in agony. Then, the darkness took shape. A shadowy figure, immense and terrifying, materialized before them. Its form was fluid, shifting between human and monstrous shapes, its eyes glowing with an inner fire that burned with an ancient rage. The entity that had once been bound by the Blackwood family's rituals had been set free. It was not just a spirit, it was the embodiment of the manor's curse, a force of pure malevolence. The figure reached toward Elias, its massive hand closing around his throat. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the unnatural silence that fell over the manor. The villagers fought back, but they were powerless against the darkness. One by one, they were taken, their bodies absorbed into the entity, their screams fading into the wind. Samuel watched in horror, unable to move as the curse of Blackwood Manor claimed yet another generation. And as the manor fell silent once more, the only thing that remained was the pulsing darkness, the thing that had been born from centuries of ritual and suffering. It would wait, as it always had, for the next unfortunate soul to come too close. The haunting of Blackwood Manor was far from over. It had claimed its victims, and it would continue to do so, feeding off the fears and souls of those who dared to challenge its ancient power. The jungle, once again, grew silent. And Blackwood Manor stood, eternally hungry, waiting for the next to come.